Have you ever wondered how a single decision can change the fate of millions? Not just for a few years, but for centuries today. We're stepping back into one of the most haunting chapters in human history, a story written not just in ancient scrolls, but in the scars and songs of an entire people. The sun hits the golden stones, the temple shines like a beacon, not just for Israel, but for all nations. Caravans come from distant lands loaded with gold, spices, rare animals. Hoping to witness the city's brilliance, people spoke in hushed awe about Solomon's wisdom, the temple's splendor, and a kingdom that seemed unstoppable. And the people watched, confused and torn, as their king, who built the glorious temple, also bowed before carved stones and timeless lessons hidden in ancient stories. Make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and drop a comment. It really helps this channel bring you more thoughtful deep dives. Taxes soared to fund breathtaking construction, forced labor became more common, and the northern tribes of Israel started feeling like little more than resources for Jerusalem's glory. And strangely enough, it still shapes our world today in a moment that sounds almost cinematic. Ahijah took off his new cloak and tore it into 12 pieces right there on the road. He handed Jeroboam 10 pieces, saying, "This is what the Lord says. I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes. Only one tribe will be left for David's descendants." He managed projects among the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, descendants of Joseph. His leadership was so obvious that it caught the eye of Solomon himself, who put him in charge of entire forced labor teams. But even more importantly, it caught the eye of God. They urged him to flex his power. "Tell them," they said, "my little finger is thicker than my father's waist." There was no empathy, no respect, just raw arrogance. And that was the spark. In a single breath, centuries of unity shattered. The northern tribes rose up, shouting, "What share do we have in David? To your tents, Israel, my father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions." The young leader fled to Egypt, spending years in exile, waiting for his moment. "If you leave our load, we will serve you forever." Only Judah and Benjamin remained loyal to David's line in Jerusalem. It was a moment pregnant with possibility, a chance to mend fractures before they split wide open. Leaders from all Israel came to the northern city of Shechem, hoping the new king would lighten the burden Solomon had placed on them. Along the way, we'll pull in modern parallels about how small compromises can fracture families, communities, and even nations. Meanwhile, inside Jerusalem's splendid walls, tension built like water. Behind a dam, they told him plainly, "Serve these people today, be kind to them, and they will serve you forever." Imagine that, the kingdom united by humility. Imagine walking through Jerusalem at the peak of King Solomon's reign. His choices became the pivot on which all of Israel's future would turn. The Bible tells us that as he grew older, Solomon's heart drifted. Drawn in by foreign alliances, he married princesses from nations that worshipped other gods. What started as clever diplomacy slowly morphed into compromise. But behind those shimmering walls, seeds of tragedy were already being sown. See, King Solomon was more than just a legend of wisdom. Picture this. High places in Jerusalem, once dedicated solely to the God who parted the Red Sea, were now crowded with idols, Ashtoreth, Milcom, Chemosh. Before we dive deeper, if you love exploring history as big as what-ifs, so what did God do? In a way that's both chilling and strangely merciful, he declared that the kingdom would split, but not under Solomon. Out of respect for David, God delayed the fracture until the next generation. This alone is profound. Imagine knowing that because of your failures, your children and grandchildren would suffer political chaos, cultural rifts, and eventually exile. How do you carry that weight? As the years passed, tensions under Solomon's lavish rule quietly grew. Among the many workers under Solomon was a sharp, ambitious young man named Jeroboam. One afternoon, as Jeroboam walked away from Jerusalem, he met the prophet Ahijah. This was no small prophecy. It was revolutionary. The kingdom would be split, and Jeroboam, a commoner, would become king of most of Israel. Naturally, When Solomon heard whispers of this prophecy, he tried to kill Jeroboam. When Solomon finally died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. It should have been a time of unity and fresh hope. They came with a simple, heartfelt plea. Your father put a heavy yoke on us. Rehoboam first consulted Solomon's old advisors, wise men who'd seen decades of palace intrigue. But then Rehoboam turned to his young friends, men who grew up in royal privilege, who'd never felt the bite of taxes or the crack of a taskmaster's whip. 3 days later, Rehoboam spoke these harsh words to the assembled tribes. In that instant, the kingdom split. 10 tribes crowned Jeroboam their king, forming a new kingdom of Israel in the north. Pause and think about this. The entire nation that once crossed the Red Sea together, that once marched around Jericho in perfect unity, was now divided, not by foreign armies, but by pride and stubbornness. In the next part, we'll see how Jeroboam tried to secure his fragile new throne, and how his choices plunged Israel into deeper spiritual darkness. How fear can twist destiny. The tragedy of Jeroboam, so the 10 tribes break away. Jeroboam finally gets his moment, and Israel now stands divided, 2 nations where there had once been one. You might think Jeroboam would fall to his knees in gratitude, or rally his people around the God who had raised him from a labor foreman to a king. But instead, something painfully human happened. Jeroboam began to panic. To protect his throne, he built the golden calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan, and told the people, Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. See, the spiritual heart of Israel was still in Jerusalem. It's as if Israel's greatest sin had been dug up, dusted off, and put on display as official state religion. The great temple, the holy feasts, the sacrifices, everything that connected the people to their God was there. Jeroboam worried that if his people kept going back to Jerusalem year after year to worship, their loyalty would drift back to, in his mind, faith wasn't just faith, it was a political threat. He invented new festivals to replace gods, ordained feasts, murder, idol worship, alliances with cruel nations. Israel stumbled from one catastrophe to the next. They warned that these choices, this casual idolatry, would end in exile. The 10 tribes were conquered, scattered across the vast Assyrian realm, never to return as a unified people. This is why even today we talk about the lost tribes of Israel. Slowly, subtly, the northern kingdom drifted from its spiritual roots. So he made a chilling decision that would echo for generations. In the end, that shortcut destroyed the very thing he hoped to protect. Pause there for a second. Does that sound familiar? That is almost word for word what Aaron said back in Mount Sinai when he made the first golden calf, real story, the small idols we justified years ago. I knew a small business owner who built his life around honesty. The family eventually prospered. My friend told me, my dad's integrity was our security, more than any deal could have been. It's proof that fear doesn't have to drive us to compromise. Sometimes faithfulness looks slower, less impressive at first, but it holds together when life's storms come. Who bows down to metal statues today? They kept the rituals, yes, but their hearts grew distant. They oppressed the poor, chased after foreign gods, ignored prophet after prophet. We bow to career titles, chasing promotions to prove our worth. If I don't play the game, I'll get left behind. They still had the temple, the priests, the lineage of David, but a new kind of spiritual strength, one that can teach all of us how to endure when our own worlds fall apart. Surely they did better, right? We worship at the altars of social media, curating perfect lives to earn digital applause. Some even sacrifice family, health, or principles on these modern altars, all in the name of survival. But we still build our own versions. His parents taught him that your word is your bond, that integrity matters more than profit. A decade later, the company collapsed under a tax fraud investigation, and he lost everything, including the respect of his children. But when a recession hit and creditors were circling, he fudged a few invoices, just small things to keep the business alive. When they moved to a new country, His dad refused to pay bribes to secure contracts, even though everyone did it. They struggled. Sometimes they couldn't afford school fees. But his father would say, better a clear conscience than a fat bank account. At first, it worked. He made payroll. No one noticed. But over time, the lies grew. His employees started cutting corners too, following his lead. Like Jeroboam, he started with fear, then justified. His compromise is necessary for survival. Israel's downward spiral. Compromise leads to chaos. Back to Jeroboam. After setting up these golden calves, he appointed priests from any tribe, not just the Levites as the law commanded. From there, the Bible becomes a grim parade of kings who did evil in the sight of the Lord. Meanwhile, prophets like Elijah and Amos pleaded with them to turn back. They didn't want to see disaster. And sure enough, in 720 BC, the mighty Assyrian Empire swept through. Modern lesson: the idols we build to feel secure. It's easy to scoff at Jeroboam's golden calves. Think about it, and like Jeroboam, we convince ourselves it's necessary. But history whispers a chilling truth. The very idols we build to keep ourselves safe often become the traps that destroy us. A family story. Choosing integrity over fear, I want to share something hopeful. A friend of mine grew up in a tight-knit immigrant family. Years later, that reputation for honesty opened unexpected doors. Clients who wanted someone they could trust. In a way, that's the opposite of Jeroboam's story. Looking ahead, Judah's parallel story. Now you might be thinking, okay, the northern kingdom fell apart. But what about Judah? Not exactly. In the next part, we'll see how Judah, the southern kingdom, also stumbled. Eventually, even Judah faced judgment. Jerusalem burned, the temple was reduced to ashes, and the people were led away in chains to Babylon. But here's the twist. From that place of total collapse, something miraculous began to bloom. A stubborn hope, a resilience so fierce that it still shapes the Jewish people today. If you're ready, tell me continue, and we'll explore how exile forged not just tragedy, the fall of Judah, and a surprising new beginning. So let's pick up with Judah. You'd think after watching the northern tribes collapse under Assyrian rule, Judah would have woken up. They still had Jerusalem, the temple, the priests. Surely they cling tighter to their covenant with God, right? Sadly, no. Judah became spiritually smug. They pointed north and said, look how faithless Israel was. Look how they chased idols. That's why they're gone. But we have the temple. God will protect us no matter what. It's almost eerie how familiar that self-assurance sounds. Like the person who says, my family's always been successful. Nothing bad could happen to us. Or the country that thinks its golden age guarantees a golden future. Meanwhile, inside Judah, greed festered. Leaders grew corrupt. Priests took bribes. Widows and orphans were ignored. Prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah walked the streets. Voices trembling with urgency. Don't trust in empty rituals. Return to God with your hearts, not just your sacrifices. Most people shrugged. Some laughed. Others hated these prophets so much they threw them in pits or plotted their deaths. When the unthinkable happens, and then it did, in 586 BC, the Babylonian war machine rolled through Judah. The walls of Jerusalem fell. The magnificent temple of Solomon, that wonder of the ancient world, burned to the ground. The streets ran red, and survivors were chained together, marched off to a strange land by the Euphrates River. Imagine being one of them, exiled hundreds of miles from home. Your entire world shattered. For many, it must have seemed like their story was over. But here's where it gets astonishing. Instead of disappearing into Babylonian culture, the Jewish people did something almost no other conquered nation had ever done. They carried their identity with them. They couldn't offer sacrifices without the temple, so they gathered in small groups to study Torah, to pray, to sing psalms by the rivers of Babylon. They turned tragedy into a deeper spiritual life. The synagogue, a center of Jewish communal worship that didn't require a temple, was born in exile. Real-world echo. My grandfather's psalms. I'll pause here for a personal glimpse. My own grandfather was a quiet man who fled Eastern Europe just before World War II. In his battered suitcase, along with a few shirts and family photos, he carried a tiny book of psalms, so worn the leather was soft as cloth. He'd whisper those psalms during storms, funerals, even moments of joy. Watching him, I realized that even without a grand temple, faith could travel in your pocket. It could anchor you when everything else was adrift. The exiled Jews in Babylon found that too. They learned God wasn't confined to a building in Jerusalem. He was with them in dusty Babylonian alleys, in tearful prayers said beside foreign rivers, a resilience that changed the world. The spiritual tenacity didn't just preserve them, it transformed them. By the time Persia conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return, they went home stronger, more rooted in their texts, their practices, their collective memory, their survival against all odds. Through Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, and countless later empires left a blueprint of resilience that still stuns historians. In fact, it's why you and I can even talk about Jewish history today. Without that stubborn decision by exiles to gather, study, and remember, their story could have ended like so many other ancient tribes, a few ruins, some pottery shards, a lost language. What's the takeaway for us? So what does all this mean for you and me, living in a world with electric cars, smartphones, and space telescopes? It means that the deepest forms of strength often grow in exile. In seasons when what you thought defined you gets stripped away, the Jews lost their land, their king, their temple, yet somehow discovered God's presence wasn't bound by geography. It's a whisper across history. Your identity isn't just where you live, what you own, or even what rituals you perform. It's what you choose to carry in your soul when all else falls apart. So let me ask you, what would you carry if life forced you to start over? What truth? What story? What fragment of hope would you pack in your suitcase if everything else burned down? Drop it in the comments. Maybe it's a family saying, a faith practice, or a memory of someone who loved you unconditionally. Whatever it is, that's your personal temple, portable, indestructible. History keeps circling back to the same lessons. Empires rise and fall. Wealth dazzles then, crumbles. Even golden temples can turn to ash. But hearts that cling to compassion, memory, faith, they're the ones that keep singing, even in strange lands. And that, my friends, is the quiet miracle that has carried the Jewish people for millennia. It might just be what can carry you, too.